This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, ideas, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood, and our guest this week is David Hefter, Managing Director of Hefter Consulting. Now, this is a management and sales consultancy operating within the media space. The topic we're going to be covering off this week is a really interesting one, and I think it's something we're all the victim of, which is campaign failed, now what? Meaning that when we're out selling media, oftentimes we are putting together campaigns that initially will underwhelm or not deliver upon the client's objectives. It can be very easy for us to burn that client relationship, to feel as though we need to throw more value at the client, to feel like we've potentially got to move on to other opportunities. But this is about what this gig is. It's about being consultative. It's about leaning into these situations. And hopefully today what we're going to be able to cover off is how, as a media sales professional, you can operate with integrity and you can operate with professionalism in a situation where you've got a client that has a campaign that has not delivered on their objectives. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
So, mate, first thing I've got to ask you, because we're drinking a coffee now, and you just did a media consult over in Ethiopia, the birthplace of the piccolo. So tell me about that. What was the remit of that consulting opportunity?
Well, apart from enjoying a number of piccolos every day because they are incredibly addictive over there in Ethiopia, the purpose of that trip, or the purpose of that particular consultancy, was to do a whole of market consultancy for an existing player in the market, specifically a satellite television station or network. They were the first entertainment satellite television network to open up in Ethiopia.
Yeah, right. And is Ethiopia what you expected it to be? Is it a frontier market? Is it more developed?
Oh, frontier is probably describing it nicely, I think. What I discovered there was, wonderful place. Certainly can't speak highly enough of both the country and the people. But as a market, it's the Wild West. And that represents a significant number of challenges for the players that are in the market, understanding that 3 years ago this was a completely closed market to all but government-run media.
Right. That's fascinating. You know, we've had a number of guests on the podcast that specialise in that international consulting space. And what's fascinating is certain markets have different foundations and different norms around the world. You know, these frontier markets are very different. But then when it comes to the media sales profession, it's amazing how much of the brilliant basics are applicable anywhere in the globe that you actually go. Was that your experience?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, if anything, I would say getting the basics right for such an embryonic market is absolutely critical for any player in that market. I think it's important to understand too that the way the government has opened up this particular category in the market has been to effectively allow anybody to apply for a satellite television license, and if they've got the money, they can get one up and running. So it's not terrestrial television. There are no transmitters per se. It's all satellite based. They went from 2 television stations to 13
right.
In the space of about 18 months. The other interesting thing that is, because it's a very closed market, Ethiopia is not a subscriber to the international copyright laws. Some of these stations are literally just taking content from YouTube
right.
and rebroadcasting it, including full movies.
Yep.
With no obvious need to pay copyright or anything like that. So very low cost of entry and low cost for content, but that creates other issues in itself around quality versus quantity and competition and things like that.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, you know, and obviously you and I worked together in the past. You know, you've been somebody who's led a national sales organisation, now moving into this global consulting. I want to know, just in your experience, you know, you've obviously stayed in the media industry for a reason. What's your favourite thing about the industry?
Oh, look, what do I love about the industry? I think the thing that I love the most is the people and the passion that they bring. I mean, it's a unique community, and I've always said it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. Would
completely agree with that. So, drawing this to a close, when we talk about the first 5, you know, and I think when we talk about the first 5, we do it in the context of a lot of the people listening are in that early step into a career in media sales and are probably struggling.
The first 5.
What does somebody need to master in terms of skills in order to be a media sales professional in your view?
Look, there's obviously a range of skills that need to be mastered, and some which can obviously be learnt. And then I think there are also some inherent personality traits that good quality sales or account managers bring to the table. So as you would know, Jamie, part of the challenge for leadership in sales is having a really good quality selection process and recruitment process and being able to identify those character traits. But if we look at the skill sets that can be mastered or learnt, there's a number, I guess, but the first one I would say is make sure that you understand how your medium actually works. Again, you're going to hear me say a lot today about getting back to the basics. I think even in today's environment, with the complexity and the myriad of media opportunities and all the various changes that have taken place, particularly over the last 7 to 10 years, getting the basics right is still critical before you can move into the more complex sales skills. So understand your media. How does it actually work? Don't just learn the lingo, but actually get into that studio. Talk to those announcers, meet with those editors, talk to the production people, whatever it might be, but gain a really strong understanding of how the medium works with the audience or the listener.
Fantastic. It's a great segue into our main topic.
Media sales mastery.
So we're talking about what happens when a campaign fails. Campaign failed, now what? So Dave, I think it's fair to say that this is multifaceted, but in your experience, when we're speaking broadly, what are some of the forces and factors that might lead to a campaign not actually working for an advertiser?
Look, there's a lot of forces and factors, and some of those are obviously within our control, and then some of those may be out of our control. It's our job, I guess, to identify what those factors are going to be when we're setting up what I call the expectation or framework, the expectation framework with the client. We really have to begin with the end in mind when we're looking at measuring and monitoring and being able to identify whether a campaign is working or not. So other factors that, or some of the most common forces and factors that could affect a campaign include poor audience identification, so sometimes referred to as reach, but do you actually know the target market? So much information available to us today, so much data that we can use to help identify not only 1 or 2 dimensional audience information, but now we can get into 3-dimensional audience information. So poor client research and understanding is another one. Have we actually selected the right client, and have we matched that client to the right media and to the right audience, and so on and so forth. The lack of understanding of how the medium really works and the elements that are mandatory to ensuring success on that medium. Again, it's our job to actually be sitting with the client and saying, if we don't do these 5 things or these 3 things, then we are increasing our risk of failure in relation to this campaign for these reasons. And sometimes it's hard for new account managers to have that conversation with a client. I can appreciate that. You sometimes feel intimidated. There tends to be, I think, an attitude with new account managers that because somebody owns and runs a business, that they therefore must be incredibly successful and incredibly knowledgeable in everything that they do. And, they are. They're incredibly knowledgeable in their business, but it doesn't mean they're incredibly knowledgeable in ours.
Well, you touch on a really good point there. I was having a conversation on a podcast yesterday, actually, Killer Media Sales, and one of the topics we covered off was this natural tension that occurs when your performance is so heavily linked back to revenue in terms of, are you generating revenue for the business? And there is a level of self-moderating and discipline that has to happen as a media sales professional to go, I'm not going to take the easy win right now. The client's ready to book on the dotted line. What I need to do is to potentially jeopardize that sale, but I need to be consultative in setting their expectations, in managing their expectations, in making sure that we actually are building a campaign that will deliver on their objectives. So, to anyone listening, I think that's something that, certainly me starting out early in direct sales, there's revenue pressure from day one. Absolutely, we get that. But operating with integrity and making sure that you're playing the long game is very important to find that balance.
Look, revenue is a byproduct of what we do, Jamie. It's not what we do.
Correct.
So that is the outcome of what you've just described.
Not the goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we do have to be prepared to sometimes walk away knowing that if we were to take or proceed with that particular campaign, it is has got a high level of risk and therefore failure is likely. And therefore the longevity of that relationship and future revenue and income is totally jeopardised by that scenario. Now, that's not an easy thing to do when you've got that, as you say, that constant pressure of making budget and getting revenue that's on you day in, day out. So a couple of other really quick things that I think that are common forces and factors are obviously poor messaging. Somebody once said to me, there's only 3 things that make a media campaign work, and therefore there are only 3 things that make it fail. And in old parlance, I guess that was reach, frequency, and the message. The message, I would argue, accounts for 80 or 90% of that failure. How many times have we seen incredibly well-researched campaigns? The media has been matched correctly. We're using the right, mix of media. We've done everything right on that side of the fence, and then we get poor content, poor execution, out of context, whatever it might be, and we see the campaign fail. And yet, literally millions may have been thrown at that particular piece of business.
And that's typically the area where I think the more difficult conversations come down, because when you're talking to an advertiser, if you're the expert in your medium, fundamentally you can really be the consultative person. But when it comes to something around their creative, they might have some level of emotional attachment to certain messaging that isn't going to connect with the audience. They might have a piece of creative that's already been produced that they want to run on your channel, so you've got no influence over that. And I think that is the area. We know the old adage of family business, great customer service. I mean, apart from Adelaide, where apparently that works really well, I can't think of any market around the globe where it does. So it's an interesting area where I think, again, that whole piece around looking at it and going, we've got to dissect every single element of this campaign, not just the part we can control. Do they have good customer service? Does the phone get answered when somebody calls? What's their follow-up with leads? Do they have a reputable brand? Do they have a trustworthy product? You've really got to look at it multidimensionally, because at the end of the day, you're looking to bring in clients that you want to work with long term. Do they actually match the criteria that you need to set as well?
Well, I think, if you're in the industry because you're wanting to have a career in the industry, then you need to think about your clients and the way you approach it from a career or long-term perspective, not just a grab for money.
So let's jump into something more tactical in terms of real time. So let's say we've got somebody listening to this podcast right now. A client gives them a call today and they say, look, the campaign that we've got running on air isn't working. It's not meeting our expectations. We think it's best to cancel. What are the next steps for that media salesperson, the ideal next steps?
I think the ideal next steps are, to go back to the beginning and look at what the expectations were to begin with. If I could take a slight step backwards, if we mentioned that there was 3 things that could make a campaign succeed, or 3 things, therefore, that could make it fail, I'd like to add a bonus one in there, if you like, which is expectation management. Because what does failure or success look like? It's different for every single campaign. It's different for every single client, and it's different for every single set of circumstances. So it's absolutely critical that when we're pre-framing or setting up the campaign structure, that expectation, agreement, goal setting, milestone setting is part of that conversation. And that is clearly discussed with the client, it's documented with the client, and there's an agreement with the client as to what those expectations are going to be. So to come to your question, Jamie, if we're now in a situation where the client's saying, well, it's not working, you have some framework to refer to. You're able to go back and say, well, hang on a minute, you're telling me that, we're only getting 10 leads a day. But in fact, if we look at our expectation management or our framework for expectation or goals, we agreed that anything over 8 leads was going to be deemed successful in the first week. And I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. If you have that documented and it's been quantified, then it's a lot easier to be having a less confrontational conversation with the client. I think the other thing that's important here is that goals and expectations and quantification comes from the client. It doesn't come from us. So having good questioning strategies when you're going through that discovery or uncovery or whatever process you want to call it, taking the brief, having good questioning strategies and eliciting this information up front will help you to manage the milestones ongoing and also to be able to deal with issues as they arrive. So that would be the primary thing that I would say, account managers need to be thinking about is an ounce of, it's the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure here.
Well, you make a really good point, because I think, we typically as media salespeople fall into the trap of going into panic mode when that happens. And there's a level of going, oh, wow, we need to throw more bonus inventory at this. Or, maybe we're just at a loss and go, look, the client's really upset. We don't want to burn our reputation. Let's just part as friends. And I think you raise a really good point around you need to actually lean into those conversations. I would recommend if a client calls you with that shouldn't be a surprise to you. If you're doing the right thing, if you, like I said, the client relationship, it always starts with the signing of the deal. So unless you're going in and putting in these milestones to check in on the client, to manage their expectations around, you're going to have a level of unease in the next 4 to 5 weeks while this thing starts to bed in. You need to be patient and you need to be comfortable with that. If you've got certain opportunities that you want to work through in real time, look, we're going to get you on air now, but I want to talk about this promotion we're running in 4 weeks. So keeping the client engaged so that you're not reacting to a phone call, you're constantly in contact. So important. I think, the through line here is obviously it's about setting yourself up for success, because if you don't do that beforehand, you're really at the mercy of what the client says, aren't you?
Absolutely, you are. And if you have built the campaign around information and cold, hard facts and data that have been extracted from the client and the client's business, and your milestones and goals have been set on that information, then it's very, very hard for the client to kind of backtrack on that, because it is their information.
Yep.
In simple terms, you told me that, if you got 20 people through the door, you would sell 10 cars. Has that number now changed?
Yeah.
It's that sort of conversation, and that's obviously in very basic terms. But other things that I think that you can do is, and you just touched on it, is, if you're being proactive, this shouldn't come as a shock. If you have any concerns at all about the campaign, perhaps not delivering, then proactively you should be taking action anyway. You shouldn't sit on it. You should move on it very, very quickly. I think that's really important. Oftentimes I used to hear account managers say or would come to me and say, oh, I got an email from this client 5 days ago or 2 weeks ago. He's not very happy. I've been too scared to call him. And I'm like, well, how do you think the things are right now then 10 days later?
Things left alone don't get better.
Exactly. It just compounds. So step on it very, very quickly. Take the proactive action. Be seen by the client to be, caring. And when I say be seen, you can't fake sincerity. You either do care about your client's outcomes or you don't. Again, I think that's one of the things that kind of signifies the difference between, very, very successful account managers in this industry and those that are, just here to collect the paycheck.
Here to make the money. Yeah, I completely agree. And, I think we've covered a bit of it, but I suppose it's vitally important when we're talking about people selling in to a marketplace where they're bringing new advertisers onto their medium or bringing new business in, how critical it is around setting those milestones. And I suppose the question is for new advertisers, can you talk a little more about some of the milestones that we should set when launching a campaign in order to keep that client dialogue open and to, I suppose, allay any concerns they have in that often shaky initial campaign period?
Yeah, look, I think what, we could spend a lot of time talking about the psychology of sales here. But I think getting straight to sort of that point is the client is looking for that level of confidence from us, both from us as individuals and as people, that we exude that confidence in our own medium and our own ability to be able to deliver the results. But then on top of that, they're also looking for factual information and examples, testimonials, whatever it might be, case studies that help support that confidence that they're making the right decision for them at the end of the day. Set the standard right up front. You will save yourself a whole lot of heartache and a whole lot of additional work and problems down the track if you have the confidence and the courage to be able to, set those expectations and to be prepared to challenge the client on their thinking around expectations. Because it's natural. Every client who's spending any sort of money in media or on a media campaign generally wants, far greater returns than than the investment than they're actually putting in. So again, it's our job to balance and manage those expectations, and particularly for new clients. If we're talking about, there's a couple of versions of new clients. Are they new to the medium? If they're new to the medium, it's really important again that you explain to them how the medium actually works. Give them an understanding of what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, how our audience reacts on this medium versus, say, another medium, so that they've got an understanding of why it might take longer to see a result on medium A versus medium B, for example. Why it may take longer to see a result because we're not doing a call to action.
Yeah.
There's no immediate response mechanism built into the content or anything like that. There's all these different factors that need to be explained to the client, and we need to take them on that journey. And it's important for us to remember we do this day in, day out. The client, if we're lucky, sees our presentation once.
Yeah.
And that's and in my experience, people hear what they want to hear. So often elements are missed by the client because they only heard the 2 or 3 things that they wanted to hear, but the other 5 or 6 things that were actually very critical to managing the expectation and making sure the campaign's going to be a success were missed. So communication is another one that I would really strongly advocate. I'm a big believer that 95% of issues come from poor communication, and logically 95% of issues can be solved with much better communication.
I completely agree. And, it's a natural kind of lead into this next question. And, it's fair to say, I mean, I've been doing this 10 years. You've certainly probably seen the last 5 years a real shift in the gravity of the media market in terms of more representation, more choice than ever before, and therefore more competition. And what we're talking about here around, consultative selling, managing expectations, pushing back on a client, they're somewhat at odds with the fact that part of the selling process is about us delivering a really compelling value proposition and promoting the multiple benefits of advertising with our medium. So fundamentally, we have to create desire, we have to create excitement, enthusiasm, we've got to sell all the features and benefits of doing a campaign with us. So how do we balance, Dave, like this need to build excitement with the client with keeping the campaign objectives clear and achievable?
Yeah, look, that's a really good and powerful question, Jamie, and not necessarily an easy one to answer. Because it's, again, logically, every medium or every account manager working for each medium is going to want to promote, the strengths of that medium and is going to do that. What I would say is don't sacrifice purpose for innovation or outcome. At the end of the day, we can get very, very excited, for example, about having a commercial on television. A client can get very excited about that. I've got an ad on TV, in simple terms. But having that ad on TV doesn't mean anything if it ultimately doesn't produce a result. Not only does it not mean anything, it means the client has wasted their money. The medium has received a poor rap, as has that particular company or organisation. And that's one of our biggest challenges, I think, in this industry is that we end up with customers going, I don't want to do any advertising at all because, I tried radio once, or I tried print once, or I tried mags once, or I tried TV once, and I didn't get the result.
Yeah.
And it's such a common thing. And a lot of time new account managers find themselves actually spending half their time just convincing new clients that the medium is okay, that the medium actually works. And look, we used to joke about it in the radio days and say, well, we've been around for 120 years, so we're fairly sure the business is still good. But, all jokes aside, there was a lot of time spent working with clients to show them the value of the medium. I guess, to be more specific about answering the question, is don't let the appeal of the medium, even though the fact you may be using it for the first time as a client, you're very excited about it, or as an account manager, you've convinced a client to use it, don't let it distract you from your purpose. It's our job, or the medium's job, to deliver the content to the target market. It's our job to make sure that we have built a campaign using that medium that will do this in an effective manner and that is measurable at the end of the day.
Yep.
And that we can show that the medium actually worked and it delivered a result. Now, sometimes we don't always deliver the exact result we're looking for, but we can still show where benefits have occurred to the client at the end of the day.
I think that's a really good point you make there, Dave. The utility can't be overshadowed by, the showbiz. And so much of what we do, certainly in any sort of a business that has the ability to do integrated content or to have, some level of, I guess, a consumer-facing brand, is that we often lean on that because it's sexy. It gets us in the door. If the client's a passionate consumer of that medium, they're going to be more inclined to want to do something there. So it's being able to leverage that where you can to get the meeting. But then when it comes down to the actual building of a campaign, you've really got to separate that element of emotional decision-making from good strategic media consulting.
Exactly.
Well, look, okay, let's draw this one to a close before we get into the next topic. The client calls you, Dave. They're determined to cancel. As the media salesperson, you've maybe made 3 or 4 attempts to rescue, the campaign. You've thrown extra bonus at them. You've reset expectations. You've had difficult combos. What I want to know is what steps could and should we take before we walk away from and potentially burn an advertiser relationship? So I guess, in other words, when is enough enough? When can we actually walk away going, you know what? We've taken the necessary steps to rescue that. It's time to part and to move on to something else.
Yeah, look, it happens, unfortunately, and I think even the best planned, best executed, and best managed campaigns can still, end up in a situation where there are circumstances beyond our control that see us having a difficult conversation with a client about parting ways. I'm a big believer that you need to be able to lie straight in bed at night. So the question I'd be asking myself, or used to ask myself, was, did I do everything I possibly could? Have I done everything I possibly could? For newer account managers, I think it's really important to draw on the resources that are around you before you make any hasty decisions about parting ways with a client. Have you spoken to your sales manager or sales director? Have they spoken to the client? Have we drawn on the resources of content, creative, promotions, whatever it might be? Have we used every element of the business that's available to us to rectify this problem? How much of this problem is actually ours, and then how much of it is actually the client? Sometimes we tend to put a lot of blame on ourselves, when in fact, when we stand back from it, and you'll find sales managers are very good at this, they will take that more pragmatic approach and look at it and go, actually, this isn't really as much about us as it is about him or her.
Yep.
And on that basis, the best thing we can do at this point in time is to part company. But let's part company amicably. Don't burn your bridges.
Yep.
I can tell you over my years of experience, there have been numerous times where I have seen clients who've left, often in quite upsetting circumstances, only to return 2, 3, 4 years later with a completely different account manager at the helm, and a different type of relationship has been established. And they've managed to convince that client to try the brand or try the medium again.
I think that's a really good summary. And I think, what you touched upon there at the end was part as friends and part in the right way. So vital.
Professionally.
So vital. Yeah, absolutely. And so much of anyone who has done any sort of client prospecting in their career knows that picking up that phone call to somebody and saying you're from insert medium here, oh, we've tried that, it didn't work. Like, that's a terrible lead, So for the betterment of our entire industry and category, I say to everybody sincerely, if you need to part ways, do it in a way that is amicable, professional, and keep the door open for future opportunity.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
This is a really interesting, I suppose, intersection of what we're talking about today, because I think at the start of the podcast, one of the things you really, hit on was failing campaigns. A lot of it actually comes back to the prospecting. Are we targeting the right client for our medium and for our audiences? Can we do a job for this? So this is a prospecting-based question. I want to shout out to Jonathan Wood, who works for JC&Co. He's a direct salesperson for their out-of-home product. Really, really big fan of the podcast. Great to get some feedback from him early on and to see that this is resonating. So Jonathan, this one's for you, mate. Here's his question, Dave. In outdoor media, we have a huge pool of potential prospects or relevant advertisers. The cost of entry is low, and we are able to tailor a campaign to pretty much suit any budget. Although this sounds like a great problem to have, it can sometimes be overwhelming and leads to my prospecting feeling unorganised and all over the place. With the availability of multiple different site options, I often spend a lot of time building a tailored proposal to send through, following the call, which leads to no result or reply. Number 1. Do you have any tips or techniques to help organise a potential call list, whether this is by industry, area or other format? And number 2, were there any specific closing questions on the call you found effective to help decide whether sending a tailored proposal through was an effective use of time? So, look, really good question. Interesting question in the sense that I think he's probably just grappling with how do I maximise the efficiency and the return on my investment of time in prospecting. What's your initial sort of interpretation of that question? What do you think could potentially help Jonathan here?
Well, reading between the lines, it sounds like Jonathan is conducting more so phone-based sales as opposed to face-to-face.
Yeah.
I'm not here to comment one way or the other whether that's good. What I will say is, in my experience, media doesn't sell well over the phone. As a general rule, but they're understanding that there are mediums out there that do have a low entry point, and so there is a degree of ability to be able to move inventory and to sell media via phone and email. But I think there are still some basics that need to be achieved when doing that process. So we talk about the word prospecting. I love the words client selection. It means the same thing, obviously, but the connotation is very different, I think, because it's very easy just to pull together a list of names, numbers and emails and start calling people and seeing whether they've got a few bucks to be able to afford to buy some digital outdoor. But at the end of the day, you still want to be selective in who you pick. Even though there may be a low entry level, it's not going to be that low that you want to be making sure that the clients that you pick actually have the necessary financial means to buy the medium for a start. One of the tips that I always give to new account managers is we talked about skills earlier in the broadcast. One of the skills that I think every new account manager in media, whether it be agency or direct, needs to gain is business acumen or business skills. You need to learn how a business runs and works. And what I mean by that is, how do they make their money? Because you will then very easily in your prospecting or client selection process be able to quickly assess and analyse whether there's sufficient turnover and therefore profit, as well as looking at what they might be spending in other medias, to go, yes, I think this client's got sufficient funds to be able to afford to do what we would have to offer. The second thing I would say to answer Jonathan's question is, have a selection process, build out your prospecting list with these clients and do the research on the clients before you call them. Don't just call them cold. Call them with some understanding and information about their industry, with some set ideas or concepts, so that you can say, look, I've been doing some research into category X, and what I understand is A, B, and C. We have an opportunity or a concept or a product that works really effectively in that environment, and then you can move into your sales structure. The second thing I'd say is, if he wants to improve the response rate, because I gather from what he's saying is that he's sending out a lot of proposals but not getting a lot of responses from that. So that's a lot of work for not a lot of return.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is, again, have you got your questioning strategies right when you're having that initial conversation with the client? Okay, we're not doing this face-to-face, but that doesn't mean we can't ask the same or similar questions to a client and get that expectation management moving. And in this particular instance, I think you're going to need to get some level of commitment to moving to the next step from the client. Otherwise, why go away and waste their time with a proposal that isn't actually specifically tailored for the right outcome, or waste your time in doing it because you're not going to get a response on it. So I think getting that commitment in that initial phone call. And then the third tip I would say is, don't just send. Make an appointment on the phone to call that client back and to present the proposal via file sharing, whatever it might be, and take them through it, because that allows you to have that Q&A opportunity to answer any objections, to go through any concerns or questions that you have, and your chances will significantly increase. And number 4, ask for the business. Yeah. I know it sounds a bit obvious, but in that environment when you're on the phone and you've been through those first 3 or 4 steps, You've selected the right client. You've had good questioning strategies. You've got a commitment to move to the presentation stage. You've actually made an appointment to present back then and there on the spot. You've done that. Ask for the business because you've got everything to gain and nothing to lose in that environment.
Absolutely.
We've got to be clear that we're differentiating this type of sale from a more complex campaign structure that may be using multiple mediums and may take a number of weeks to get to that point where you can get a decision and may require a number of different conversations with different stakeholders. If you're talking to the key decision maker and you've been through that process, you've got nothing to lose by asking them whether I want to proceed with it or not.
This was one thing I grappled with here because I know the business that he works in, and I know they've got very, very good people in the business, and their sales leadership in particular, fantastic. So I think it's an interesting question coming from him. I don't think he's not getting supported by his business at all. I think what he is potentially trying to uncover here, which we all struggle with in prospecting, is that whole thing of going, I've got this really beautiful product that's somewhat relevant to everybody. So how do I actually put a tightly defined scope on who I want?
A nice problem to have, by the way.
It is. And I think your point earlier around, my advice to Jonathan was similar to yours early on in saying, if we're operating under the premise that you're doing predominantly phone-based sales, that's a different strategy to how I would recommend you prospect if you have the ability to go and do a meeting. But I think your summary there of, fast forwarding 12 months and going, what kind of client portfolio do I want to have? There's only so many hours in the day. So, do I want to have 10 advertisers spending this much with me across these industries? And how do I reverse engineer my prospecting to arrive at that outcome in 12 months? The idea of not actually tailoring a proposal and very quickly qualifying, if they're not going to agree to the follow-up meeting for you to take them through over the phone, chances are they're not relevant or worth the time.
Yeah, they're not, you haven't reached that point where they're committed to taking the next step.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you walk away necessarily, but you're going to have to do some more work to build that rapport for them to get that sense of trust. I know you, I like you, I trust you, and I have enough information now to be able to make an educated decision. So, it's as you've pointed out, it is a different sales environment and a different sales strategy. And the other thing I would say about his prospecting list is break it into 3 sections. Because you do have a product that has a broad appeal, as I said, nice problem to have, look at what portion of your prospect list is made up of the small fish, because small fish are sweet, the medium-sized opportunities, and then the larger-sized opportunities. You can't do all large because, as we all know from experience, it takes a long time to land a big fish. But by working on each of those 3 areas consistently, you will consistently bring in small to medium opportunities, and then every so often one of those large ones will present itself.
That's a really good just suggestion early on for anybody going, look, my prospecting feels a bit unfocused. I'm hitting a particular category, being able to actually identify, that tier 1, for want of a better term, tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 opportunities, particularly if you're prospecting in a category. The one thing, in my probably cold calling days of direct sales are well behind me now, but one of the things that I used to always make a point of doing is if I was prospecting into a category, I would make sure that if I didn't get a meeting from the phone call, that I would get some piece of information that would inform the next call I make. Look, not interested. Okay, completely understand, that's the situation. You're not in a position or you're not interested in a meeting. Hey, let me ask you about your industry though. What are the drivers? When's your busy period? Who are the big players in the market? That's a cheeky one, but who are the big competitors? What are the factors that actually drive your business, being in demand or not? And how do we actually take that information and just build it up so that the next phone call you can go, hey, listen, understanding is that you guys really start to ramp up around this time of year. I want to come and talk to you now about that. So you'll actually find that very quickly you can develop a shorthand with people in this industry that makes you sound credible and allows you to actually probably uncover opportunity where there wasn't some before.
Oh, absolutely, Jamie. And I think, there's the fact is that there is so much information available to us as sales professionals these days. We can do so much research on categories, on clients. There's really no excuse for not knowing who the next 3 competitors on the ladder are behind the largest.
Yeah.
And then being able to go and actually research those, not only those businesses, but actually the individuals within those businesses, and then look at how we can make connections to those individuals in more meaningful ways rather than just a cold call on the phone. So in other words, I believe you could make every call you can make in today's environment is a referral-based call. You just have to do the hard yards. You just have to do the legwork. You just have to find somebody to refer you to that situation.
Yeah, that is a really good summary there. And look, Jonathan, David, obviously Hefter Consulting. If you want to reach out to Dave and have a chat, I'm sure you'd be open to that, Dave.
I'd be more than happy to do that, yeah.
How do people get in touch with you, Dave, if they want to chat to you?
Oh, look, the best way is just email me or call me. So my email address is pretty simple. It's davidhefter@hefterconsulting.com.au.
Yep.
Or if they want to get in touch with you, Jamie, please feel free to pass on my mobile phone details. But yeah, I'd be happy to chat to anybody and give them a few ideas.
A few tricks of the trade. Well, mate, thanks for being here today. It's much appreciated. I guess my summary before I let you kind of wrap up, my summary here is there's a reason that I wanted to put this topic as one of the main topics of season 1 of this podcast. This will separate a good media salesperson from an ordinary one. How you actually handle a failed campaign. When the market's booming, when industries are flying, when your product's great, when the campaigns are going great, that's fine. That's fine. Everyone can ride that wave. What you do in the tough times actually separates you and builds your reputation very quickly. So my sincere recommendation to anyone, if you're looking to level up, if you want to make a career, get good at this, because this will absolutely fare well for you through your career. Any parting thoughts from you to kind of wrap up the topic around, campaign failed, now what, Dave?
Yeah, look, I would just reiterate what I said, begin with the end in mind. Make sure that part of your discovery process or your consultative selling process or your challenger sales process, I know everybody's doing different things, but fundamentally they're all the same. We're all looking for the same outcome here. You must include expectation management as part of your questioning strategy. You must be prepared to have that conversation with the client that says, right, we've done everything else. Before we part company, what is your expectations in regards to what a success or a failure looks like? Because until we know what that looks like, if something does go wrong, we can't go, well, actually, is it failing? We actually don't know because we didn't have that conversation. Or is it succeeding? We actually don't know because we didn't have that conversation. The other final bit of advice I'd give anybody who's new to the industry in sales is resilience. Resilience, persistence, and commitment. Those 3 things will get you a lot further than most of the other skills that we've discussed today. It is about hanging in there. I always used to say that the first 12 months of an account manager's career is learning. It's a steep learning curve. In the second year, you come across the same situations, but now you have some skills and some knowledge, and you're able to deal with those issues more readily. By year 3, you're proactively anticipating and you're in that environment where everything you're doing is for the most part making the right steps. That's how long it takes.
That's awesome. And, I always do a wrap up, but I'm going to let you do the one there because that's exactly what I always say. Progress before perfection is the name of the game. And I hope that everyone listening, you can instantly apply some of these techniques that Dave has shared today into your own business. Hang in there, reach out with any questions, keep listening. David Hefter, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. Head to MediaSalesMastery.com to help pick the topic, guide the show, and don't forget to subscribe to receive new episodes each week.